I don't remember the last time that I was here. I'm going to say it's close to about 10 years. It was enough certainly to forget all this room and a number of other things. And having to sound forth for so long gets to be a little bit much. Now, I mentioned some things yesterday and start off that way. There's a pastor, he was very interested in showing up here the Reverend William Hampton, Captain of the United States Navy. And he's very much interested in Gottesdienst. Because he showed up at the Dead Orthodox meeting in Minnesota last April, and he always shows up at the seminary. And I can't figure it out. Here, his church supports the Lutheran Church in Indonesia, which is not in fellowship with our church, but here is a picture of Bishop Bill, Captain Hampton there, with Archbishop Vonix over there. I mentioned that we're not operating on purely denominational lines anymore when it comes to Lutheranism. We find ourselves very much in similar beliefs and practices with people who are in other synods and other churches. And what he does, and I wish he would get this stuff to me earlier, but he provides his congregation with an exegesis of the gospel for every Sunday. And we have to teach a Greek class, and those who were in at least my class know that I mention him quite often, and I wish I could have it. He also provides this for his congregation. It would be worthwhile contacting him. He has the significant holy days and persons in the history of the church which he distributes. So from the week beginning on September the 13th, he has a brief paragraph on John Chrysostom, Holy Cross Day, Cyprian, Bishop of Carthage, 200 to 258, Hildegard, Abbess of Bingen, who was a very influential person with the Emperor and also with the Pope, and Dag Hammarskjöld. I find this to be very intriguing. Now, I know there's a difference of opinion about which lectionary series to use, and for somehow I'm going to go back and check on the email exactly what pericope was assigned for the day. I find the three-year series to be very challenging, intriguing, and always informative, because we're getting close to how the Gospels were written. I do not agree with my colleagues that we have to speak to the common man. I don't buy that song and dance at all. We're not going to get people into Bible class, and this is the best way that we can do to go throughout the entire Gospels. Now, my son is more into this than I am, and I wish somebody would write this, that in regard to the Gospel of Luke, thank heavens we've gotten rid of the course in biblical hermeneutics interpretation. Because just because you use the historical grammatical method, I am convinced that the historical grammatical method teaches you absolutely nothing about what a Bible passage says. Because all you end up with a lot of details of verbs and nouns and datives and subjects like that, and what the heck are you supposed to do with that stuff? You can say that the scriptures are narrative, and of course in the case of Luke, it does have, at least the pericope that was read today, Jesus in the temple. There's a line of thought going on, so that when you have, after you have studied one pericope, you are then ready for another. We're not going to be able to chuck the church here and become evangelicals and read the scriptures through an entire book. But this is what it appears to me, and I will not be able to pursue it, that there is something in the Gospel of Luke that resembles things that happened in the ancient classical world. Now, I'm not in any way supporting John Nordling and his interest in the classics. We had a whole symposium that attracted about 150 people about a week ago on campus. And these people really, it's like attending a music conference. It always starts off with the same thing. Luther says that music is the handmaiden of theology. Luther said that music was second in importance to theology. Okay, you've said it. Please don't say it again. And every conference that you go to, they say the same. I don't know if Fritz Eckhart has got copies of the Concordia Theological Quarterly, but someone may remember this. Did I or did I not write an essay on Phoebe? And that Phoebe was a who? Speak up. Speak up, Kuzumar.
He was a man.
He was a man. Now, the Holy Ghost does not, I don't qualify as an apostle because even though I am inspired more frequently than I would like to be, I do not have, he has not brought all things back to memory, so I don't qualify. But I'm in the second team. So I don't know. We'd have to send someone back into Dr. Eckhart's office to look for this particular. See, that's a very significant passage because for those of us who would like to see women in the priesthood and to see more women be ordained and so forth and so on, we use that passage. I think it's in Romans where she's called a diaconess. And, you know, today, it's, I don't think I could tolerate being a grade school teacher for this reason, because of the names that are given. I go to the American Health Club around 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's a billboard there of the names of the babies that have been born at some hospital, Parkview. Well, I don't remember what it was, but about several weeks ago, I decided I was going, because I'm the old dead Orthodox type. I don't have all these electronic devices and all that kind of stuff. I still use a pencil and that kind of Iowa stuff. And that's where it goes, you know. Last year, at this time, I went down to Hobie Airport in Houston, and I had to telephone the person up who was going to get me in his car. There was no payphone in the Houston Hobie Airport. I had to go to the Help Strangers desk, Help the Local Idiots desk, and they don't even let you dial, because I guess they think you're going to dial China or something like that. And so you see all those names, and I began one Saturday morning, I said, I am going to commit myself to writing down all these absurd names. I mean, if someone gets an name like Harold or John or Michael, I mean, it's a blessing. But can you imagine being a school teacher and looking at 30 names that have never existed? All things enter into the mind of God, but those things do not. Hey, it's Dustin Hoffman over there. And what was I talking? Yes. What was I talking about? Yeah, that's the question. And that is, you can't tell. Maybe with these names you can tell who the boys are from the girls. I wouldn't want to be in a situation, because people get offended. Because, you know, you just come up to me, Brady, and say, hey, you don't remember me? And I say, yeah, let's keep it that way. Oh, you don't really know me as a person? That's right. I don't need to know, and I really don't care. But that has to be a very difficult situation. But with this idea of the reason that I got the information out of the Journal of Biblical Literature, which is a good hierarchical, Bible-destroying journal, which I thoroughly enjoy and rarely understand. But I thought that was a significant thing, because it doesn't come from a dead Orthodox source. Because they're looking for anything they can to hang their hat on, so far as the ordination of women is concerned. And I think it's in Romans that Phoebe is a diaconess. It's like the term Leslie. You really can't tell by some names whether they're men or women. And if you make a mistake, may the Queen of Angels have mercy on your soul. People really get uptight about those kinds of things. Boys should be dressed in blue, girls should be dressed in pink, and those who are in between can, I guess, merge the colors. I don't know.
Dress, amateur, where does
Okay, that's good. At our church, we only wear pink on Rejoice Sunday in Lent and Advent. Now, sometimes this goes too far. So you say, oh, this is a gruesome Lent. Okay. So what we have to do, we have to brighten it up. So you wear pink. Now, the first time you see it, you think you've gone into some lingerie shop. What's with you, Captain? And then they say, well, since we are equal opportunity employers, if we're going to kind of break the monotony of Lent, we better break the monotony of Advent. So then we put it in the third Sunday in Advent. They put in, out comes the pink Chaucer bowl. That makes us all happy. Of course, it's all a great hypocrisy. You know that Lent is 40 days, but there are more days. Oh, we don't count Sundays. However, when you go to church, we do count it because the service is extremely somber. This is Lent. Let's all fast. So how do our churches begin with? Lenten suppers. I have very little use for Lutheranism. I can rarely tolerate it. But in regard to the Gospel of Luke, and I think Peter Eckhart's in the course. Aren't you in that Gospels course?
No.
Who's in that course? Anybody from that course? From here? I forgot that I was supposed to be teaching this about an hour ago, so... And I do not tell the authorities ever where I'm going. It's none of their gosh-darn business. But what appears to me in the Gospel of Luke, is that's the way the old method never really worked. Because it assumed that if you knew all of these hermeneutical principles and the historical critical method, you would really know the pericope, but what the tale was about. And you really didn't do it. And then you take the old one-year system, nobody knows why the Gospels are in that particular order. So one of my colleagues who's no longer there, well, this is based by ancient heritage and history. Okay, where? Nobody seems to know. And I've yet to find a rhyme or reason to the thing. He had also suggested to me that the 3-year series was an attempt to subvert the church with false teaching. Well, and he suggested that I should write something, discover that and write it, but that's the kind of courageous guy he was. He would always send somebody else to do the work, and then when you got shot, you just landed out there. It just appears to me that the Gospel of Luke, the various incidents that you have some parallel in ancient history. And the first time I came across that was a lecture by, may his soul rest in peace, Karl Heinrich Rengstorff. I knew him from Germany, and he came over and he gave a lecture. And that lecture is lost. But his paper was to see a correlation between the shepherds in Luke's Christmas account and the founding of Rome by Romulus and Remus and the animals. So that this was not something which was completely strange to the pagan world. I mean, Luke has a big job. Matthew doesn't do the job. His great contribution is how can we keep the Old Testament? That's his great contribution. And I'm interested, somebody there had an article there by Andy Bartell on the Old Testament. I don't know if you read it, but I'd like to know exactly what he thinks about the Old Testament. It's going to appear in the CTQ in about 6 months, an article in which one of my colleagues, for whom I have the greatest admiration in the world, as I do for all of them, that the Old and New Testaments are equal. No, they are not equal. And by the way, Fritz, where are you? You have to buy a book of the Gospels. Thinking about it. I was here 10 years ago. And it doesn't. All you do is take that big Bible, take a sharp knife, and cut out the 4 Gospels. Now that's all you got to do. But by using the Bible, the total Bible in the Gospel procession, you're falling into the era of my colleague who says that the Old and New Testament are equal. We evangelicals believe that the Old and New Testament are equal. And they are not. Neither are the three persons of the Trinity. They are equal in regard to being deity, but they are not equal in regard to function and personhood. They are not. And this is a very weak point in Lutheran theology, and I think we were discussing that last night, that even Dr. Pieper does not go into that. He has errors about the Trinity and the Trinity in the Old Testament, but he doesn't answer that fundamental question. But see, for example, the account of Jesus in the temple, which is the gospel appointed for today, but I really think the better gospel today would have been the cross scene, behold your mother, behold your son. Because even though that's used by most of you here to teach the perpetual virginity of our Blessed Lady, it's really the establishment of the church. It is an anti-Petrine statement. It's not saying, where am I going to stay tonight? That's not the purpose of that pericope. Oh, that's a silly thing. Who was the first Christian? Oh, it was Eve. It was Adam. No, it was Isaiah. Oh, forget it. It's as silly as the discussion we had about Martin Stephan last night. Who cares? Take a crowd, put them on a boat in the Mississippi River, and don't give them any oars. But that account, I wonder if we can find in ancient classical literature an account of some noble philosopher who, as a youth, exhibited. Remember, Jesus is not teaching in that episode. He is asking questions, which immediately brings to mind who? Speak up, please. Yes, it looks like it's Socrates. Here we have a young Socrates who has heard a discourse and now is.
It's not Socrates. It's Alexander. There's no stories of Socrates as a youth, but there are stories of Alexander as a youth.
Then why don't you write the book since you know about it, really? I'm not going to write it, you do it. And also the account of the ancient parents of John the Baptist. I bet you would find something. I bet you would find something like that. And I have a lot of fun teaching. I don't use the word teaching because I go in there. I'm not so sure. It's lucky I get to the right room. It's lucky if I get there at all. And I have no idea what the pericope is, and I face it cold, and I see things that I have never seen before. And so it makes preaching a heck of a lot easier than it was before. Because you can actually move from one Sunday to another. You set up a sequel just as it was going through the writer's mind. I have a manuscript here, and with your permission I'll use it. I can't vouch for its value or anything else. And even though Fritz says that maybe I should just sit there and wing it and so forth, but tell you, after a day like yesterday, with a great service and dinner and partying and a mass this morning, the well goes a little dry. And this essay is allegedly called Liturgy, Church, Ministry, some Afterthoughts. An unanticipated family occasion in 2007 put me in the embarrassing situation of having to decline an already accepted invitation to the Gottesdienst Oktoberfest here in Kewanee. Seminary student Peter Eckhart, who was sufficiently sensitive, I guess maybe he's adopted, to take notice of my desire to make things right, and so he let the host clergyman of the conference know that I would be pleased to cash in my rain ticket. Characteristically, a precise outline may not be detected, what I'm going to say. Since I worked, or rather until I added to this essay over several weeks in the summer. As opportunity presented itself, I sat down at the computer, put down random thoughts on a variety of subjects, and when the swan song is sung, when the swan song is being approached to be sung, singing precisely the right notes and keeping on pitch becomes less important. As noted, the topic for this conference, allegedly in Trinity 2010 issue of Gottesdienst, is ministry. There is hardly more that I could say on this issue that I have not already said, and perhaps much of what has been printed should not have been said at all. And at the end of this essay, I believe my bibliography on the ministry, well, it runs to about a page and a half, just of essays on this topic. Since beginning the essay, John F. Brugge, who is a favorite teacher of Mr. Westgate, his book, The Ministry of the Word, has appeared from Northwestern Publishing House, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, year 2009. And should time allow, something will be said about this at the end of this presentation. Perhaps of equal importance, we'll be reading the reviews of Brugge's book in the Lutheran periodicals. Now, I brought that book along, and we will never come back together. We will never come back together with the Wisconsin Synod as long as they hold this non-doctrine of the ministry. And he is absolutely ferocious in his, when he says, see, the heresy begins by saying the ministry of the word. There is no ministry of the word. He holds to a kind of an abstract idea of the word, and then various people in the church can go and use that word, and then when you're in that, when you use the word, you actually become a clergy person or a minister, or you all become equal. And that controversy goes back to the read. I'm not going to get into the Ziegler controversy. Those guys can enjoy the 16th century Ziegler, Pless, and Masaki. They can wallow around in that all they want. But this goes back to the meaning, to Article 5 of the Augsburg Confession. The late Robert Preuss, may his soul rest in peace, he held that this was simply a general ministry, and that Article 14 was established what we know as the pastoral office. And I'll tell you, friend, he changed his mind since the 7th.
He lost his job.
Who said that? You have to be so coarse. What do you say when his call was threatened? That's true. And all of a sudden you begin to see things that, the way we have it now, by the way, you're not going to solve it. The way we have it, it's bad the way we have it now, but putting in Article 14, because then you get into one of these discussions of rite vocatus. And then you get out rite vocatus. Okay, one crowd will say the rite vocatus, rightfully called or called by ritual or whatever that means. The one crowd will say you have to have a voters' assembly. The other crowd, you have to have the sacrament of ordination. And we've had really weird things happening in our seminary. Because it wasn't that many years ago that the students were not allowed to wear clerical collars to the call service because their call was not official until they graduated. So they received call documents that were unsigned, which they then get upon graduation. Now, all this was a lot of hypocrisy because the call to the ministry really begins when you're admitted into the seminary. That's when it begins. And on that account, if you happen to have a copy of the New Testament, and Fred Eckhart will have a copy of the 4 Gospels, all bound, instead of some of that primitive stuff that you carry around in the Old Testament. What's that?
Take donations.
I'll get a knife and I'll do it for you. I might not be the neatest guy in the world, but I'll try. Now, what was I talking about? Oh, yes. And that is, it's a very difficult thing to get to the seminary. You have to be interviewed by the district president and the committee, and then you got to meet someone at the campus. And you know what? You're still there's no way you can prevent the losers from coming in. That's the way it is. And we even have a guy on campus, Fred Davis, who gives you a psychological examination. Did you take one? You must have bluffed your way through that. But then again, that wasn't much of an obstacle. At least that's what you told me. You knew what to say. I don't believe in this nonsense about getting the perfect match because when you go to your oncologist or your cardiologist or whatever, you're not interested in his personality. You're interested in whether he delivers the goods. Instead of, after a while, it becomes a personality business. But the call really begins when you're admitted into the seminary. And that's when it's done. It's rather, of course, then, I don't know how I got on this topic, but then the question is, you only get a call from a voters' assembly. Okay, as I mentioned yesterday, they called this guy. Is it called divine? Yes, it's divine. Okay, you call this guy to run the radio station or with this media services. He's called. All of a sudden, he's looking upon himself as a minister. And so you got one big, bland, what has happened, we have an homogenization of the ministry in the Missouri Synod today. So this is something which in the days of dead orthodoxy you didn't have. You did not have professional workers' conferences. The clergy met by him or herself. That's what it was. They met by themselves. And there's biblical precedent for it because this is exactly what Jesus is doing all the time. Our Gospels really are Jesus preaching to the disciples and his explanation of what he was saying. And it gets to be kind of, if you look at the history of the Missouri Synod, it gets to be kind of silly that a person like Francis Pieper, may his soul rest in peace, he had to take a job of being an associate pastor at St. Paul's because what he was doing as a seminary and synod president was not a divine call. And then you also say, well, if it isn't a permanent call, then it isn't divine. Well, that gets to be observed too, because you can have a congregation with 5 people, and it might be a good idea to merge that crowd in with another crowd, but the clergy person is saying, I have a divine call. So what you do, you have built up this huge fabrication of exactly what this is. And then in this activity, by the way, you say ordination is not a sacrament. But the one thing you want to avoid, I think it's a sin to have an ordination service in July and August in the summertime at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I ain't going. I'm not going. And so those things get to be extremely elaborate. And then everybody gets, have you been to one of those ordination services? I bet you do it. And you, Joe? Yeah, you know that I've had a pretty great ministry. And I've been able to overcome obstacles. Now, and it's so nice that your wife, why doesn't your wife come up here at the same time? So we can, and then you bring up the children, and then you think you wear. No, it's an article convention. No, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see. We hire, and the word is hire, according to Wade Sweever, or Toyin Sweever back there. It's a job. We're not hiring your wife. We're just hiring you, even though she probably writes the sermons. What will be a favorable appraisal of the reviews on Brugge's book will indicate that the rift among Lutherans on the office of the ministry is greater than anyone thought, and that a reassembling of the old synodical conference is an impossibility. Now that's a history in itself. Francis Pieper knew that the Wisconsin Synod had the false position, and he described it under somebody else's name, namely Peffling. That's what he did. And the issue was that his brother was the one, August Pieper, who was the one who was putting forth the false view. And it is extremely bad, because John F. Brugge from Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary in Mequon, Wisconsin, will specifically say that the office of the parish pastor is not divinely established. That's what he says. And he not only says it once, he says it again and again. It's a kind of a book, if you read 10 or 15 pages, you don't have to read the rest, because he just goes on, he brings up the same thing again. Hundreds and thousands of men and women in our churches are installed into a ministry of some sort, all of which would not matter except for the use of the term ministry. The term ministry is used without biblical or confessional support. In other words, the word ministry is used in ways that is neither supported nor tolerated by the 1st or 16th century writings. That's the Bible, by the way. Got that? Attached to this problem, the word call, and confusion increases. Having a divine call assures greater job security than a union contract, and allows the incumbent in whatever office into which he or she has been inducted to do whatever he or she pleases, or so it seems. In tackling the topic of the ministry, some things will first be said about the liturgy in the church, since the liturgy and the church provide the environment in which the ministry has its origin, purpose, and function. Every church has clergy without ministerial portfolio. But if this exists in our church, and it does, it is a matter to be addressed and given a remedy. Ministry is more than a function, but it at least is a function. One well-renowned conservative scholar, whose seminars in Europe you go to, holds membership in the Southwest California district, who may not have preached or conducted a Lutheran service, and who may have been regularly absent from the pews of our synod. This is not a solitary case. You'd be surprised how many people have additional jobs which are not connected to the congregation, and they don't go to Mass on Sunday. There's absolutely no way in which they can be. Now, we don't have any on our faculty, but we had at least 2. I'll be happy to tell you who they are if you want to know. Participating in the church's liturgy, and let's take this step one step further, presiding at the liturgy belongs to what it means to be a minister. Ministry becomes visible in those who are serving at the altar. So it was with Abel, Aaron, and Christ himself. In the beginning of our church's history, the ministry was defined as an action of a congregation through its legally constituted assembly to procure, voters' assembly to procure a pastor. In this matter, C.F.W. Walther's church and ministry must be read and reread to find out exactly what he's saying. Now, Walther's definition excluded missionaries, theological professors, and full-time synod and district officials, which at that time did not exist. They had auxiliary offices. They had offices auxiliary to the parish pastor, a defensible category, in a sense. The permanent expression of the ministry in one place is the parish pastor. Problematic is that those who were not theologically prepared, like parochial school teachers, were placed in the same category. From my perspective, arguments can be made that the functions of missionary and theological professor are the primary expression of the office of the pastor. In doing a paper like this, things get lost, but there's one passage where it says, I'm going to send forth apostles and prophets. The apostles are missionaries, the prophets are the permanent preachers. Missionaries are the most primary expression of the pastoral office because they plant the seed, or to use the biblical metaphor traceable to Jesus and Paul, a sower went out to sow a seed, and I planted, others watered, others tilled the soil and reaped the benefits of the one who planted. Jesus taught the disciples as a special group in order to establish his teachings as a fixed tradition among the people. This specialized training took place before and alongside of his teaching of the people. And this is indicated in, for example, in Matthew 13, where you have all the parables cluttered up together, and then he takes the disciples aside and gives them an explanation. Jesus was continually calling the disciples aside to give them explanations of what he taught the people. And all of this ended up in our Gospels, and with later interpretation, made to fit various situations in the teachings preserved in the epistles. While we hold to the church's invisibility, in the sense that its fullness is only known to God and will be revealed to us only at the end time, the church's corporate unity services in saying and hearing of the liturgy, especially the Holy Communion. With all its different expressions, a common liturgy is evidence of the Church's Catholicity, and thus Lutherans are less estranged from Roman Catholics than they are from the Reformed. Lutherans and Catholics are saying some of the same things on Sunday, but with the proviso, they are interpreted differently. Before we go any further, many of our people are interpreting hymns, liturgies, and our sermons in senses far different from what they are originally intended. A recent Pew poll, and you probably made reference to it last Sunday in your own sermon, revealed that nearly half of Catholics hold to the symbolic view of the Lord's Supper characteristic of the Reformed. A survey of our own people will uncover a similar statistic. A statistic that troubled the late Don Defner, may his soul rest in peace, but a statistic with which I am happy to live with. By repetition and overuse, liturgy, doctrine, sermons can deteriorate into cliches. Since we, the clergy, are well informed in these matters, we may become insensitive and unaware of what our words mean to the people. However, too much instruction can become annoying and then pedantic, and the people are turned off by it. I'm turned off by it. Liturgy has an ecumenical dimension that sermons do not, except the Pope's sermons. His sermons are pretty good. For some reason, when we moved on campus, and that's almost 4 years ago, it was determined that I was in a special class, so I was not intended to the privilege of having a cable TV, even though a person of less consequence, and I certainly would not mention Carl Broughton over there, had cable TV.
We didn't have a TV.
Excuse me?
We didn't have a TV.
You did? Oh, you're one of those people, you know, where you have the kids praying in Latin too? What a nut. Yes, and we got it, thanks to Mrs. Wenthy. And Dorothy calls me and she says, it's the Holy Father preaching on All Saints' Day. And he was preaching on the Beatitudes. And the Holy Father took the exact same attitude that I do to the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes is not about Christians. They are about Christ. There's where Mr. Gibbs and I, from St. Louis, differ greatly. The gospel is never about us. And there was the Holy Father. He's pretty good. He is a theologian. Now, the previous occupant was not a theologian. He was more of a show person. He was an actor. And so the important thing was how he looked. This guy is a little bit different. Now, you shouldn't be upset if your people hold to Reformed views, because if they say the elements are symbolic, how do you know what they mean by symbolic? And then if you take them the plus route and tell them what the real words, what the real meaning is, they'll recite the real meaning, and then what? No, they won't even know what that means. Have you ever thought about, I believe in God the Father. What does this mean? I believe that God has made me and all creatures. Okay, what does that all mean? So you're always explaining something, and you're getting further and further away from the biblical text. But liturgy has an ecumenical dimension that sermons do not. Theological differences, some severe and others less so, are in the liturgical moment submerged with the participants coming to a unity of faith, not necessarily accessible in theological discourse. In fact, I really wonder if church unity can ever be fully realized in theological discourse. Well, someone said, didn't I see Masaki and Ziegler? Well, the answer is no. Maybe that answers that question. Even within a strictly disciplined confessional fellowship, differences of how things should be understood exist. But common or similar liturgies bring opposing parties together, from which point differences can be addressed, but not necessarily perfectly so. Nevertheless, within the church's liturgy, its Catholicity emerges and can be recognized, so we can say with Jacob, this is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Thus, Trinitarian substitutions in the liturgy of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America cannot be ignored, precisely because they corrupt Catholicity and destroy ecumenical potential. Which brings up another issue, which somebody brought up yesterday to me, and that is, who was the person who told me that they changed the wording of some of our hymns? Would you please express yourself, Colonel?
Well then,
Stand up and project your voice.
okay, let's see. What of the hymns we sung most recently? Oh, how blessed are ye whose toils are ended. In LSB, that would go to they, setting aside out of not recognizing it as either poetic or just a second person address, but as heresy that you should not speak to the dead. That would be an example. There's a couple more hymns.
It was one with Our Blessed Lady, too, you brought up.
Yep.
A hymn that I wasn't acquainted with. They took in the old hymnal, they took out, oh, greater than the cherubim, oh, higher than the seraphim.
Oh yeah, and then also the Fortunatus, the sixth stanza, O cross, our wonder lions hail, O may thy power with us avail, to give new virtue to the saint and pardon to the penitent. That got whacked in LSD. Because it's a prayer to an inanimate object, is what they said. That had to go. There are a few others.
You know, that's one of the reasons I have very little use for Lutheranism. The late Robert Preuss, may his soul rest in peace, he did not like the idea of doctrinal review at all. He did not like it. And there is something sacrilegious about this, and I'm not going to do a study of this, but if somebody did, I think you would find other adjustments. Because what's happening is that you take an abstraction, a doctrinal abstraction, and you plant it over what the person is saying. Now, first of all, that person did it, it comes out of his or her poetic mind. The person who is doing this generally has the poetic ability of a meat cleaver. He sits there and goes, right, wrong, right, wrong, right, wrong. And it's even true within some of the good Calvinistic hymns, which they've taken into the... These things can be understood in the proper way, but you should not adjust the writing of another person to fit. And that's a very annoying thing. You wish to say, Captain?
I just remember you bragging about an essay that you improved on significantly as the editor of CTQ.
What article was that?
I don't know, you talked about it this morning or last night.
We did work on the article on Walter Ray Meyer quite a bit, and so did Dr. Rast.
It was Rast. You edited Rast. That's what you were bragging.
No, I didn't edit Rast. I took Rast's essay and popularized it. I didn't, we get a lot of stuff which is very difficult to comprehend. And here I disagree with Mr. Gieshin. Because if I should trip once, you can bet that I would be trampled to death by Mr. Gieshin, known as Mother Charles of the cloister of St. Anne. And that is, I have to understand something before we publish it in the CTQ. And also, if you're not going to take the trouble to write intelligibly, I sure am not going to do it for you. No way. Referee to, well, Dave, you cleaned up this essay. No, I'm not going to do it. So, but that's the reason. I did not, in some essays, which are very valuable, we have to, the essay on Walter Meyer was all over the place. So that took some work. But I don't take it. So I didn't do it, that Larry's stuff. The Trinitarian substitutions that you have in the ELCA, they lead the church not only into bland sectarianism, in which changes are intended to be cute. Rather, these changes are profound, leading the church into apostasy, which some of the ELCA clergy persons are recognizing. Now, we mentioned this yesterday, that you have an uneven response in the ELCA to its changes. We should not be upset about that, and neither should we reject them. But these are not, I do not like cutisms, because you really do not appeal to me when you say something cute. You're really not a humorous person, so just live in your own Midwestern personality, and so we can, handle it that way. These are not cute. These are men. The ELCA hymnal is into apostasy, and it's not we who are saying it, but it's the ELCA clergymen who are saying it. Now, they have a job on their hands, and they will do it. They have to come into a realization themselves of why something, you can't simply say this is apostasy. Tom Oden, who's at Drew, he admitted it, and I was there. He admitted that the United Methodist Church is in a state of apostasy. It's one thing to be sectarian. It's an entirely another thing to be in a state of apostasy. I mean, that's not even unbelief, because you are already a believer and you're rejecting the faith of the church. Church unity, that is its Catholicity, is incapable of being perfectly seen, even within a particular confessional fellowship. But it can be experienced by being heard first in the reading of the Scripture, the recitation of the creeds, the liturgy. The liturgy is no more than extended confessions and preaching, where the faith is confessed, the word read and preached, prayers offered to God, and hymns sung, and where the sacraments are administered, the church is present. This is another way of saying that the church is built upon the Word, that is, the church's boundaries are coterminous with the presence of Christ. In some sermons, Christ is not preached, hence he is not present in those sermons, and the church cannot be recognized as Catholic. Problematic is determining with precision the presence of the church where doctrine and sacramental practice are defective. Though Lutherans following the Reformer speak of the superiority of the Word, this may be little more than honored cliché, because it is presupposed we have a common understanding of what the Word means. Of course, much of Lutheran theology and preaching is open to critique. I don't really care for such phrases as word and sacrament, and those, scriptures and confessions and all that stuff. Jonathan Trigg, an Anglican clergy person, observes that when Martin Luther speaks of the Word, it is hard to determine whether he is referring to Christ, the proclamation, or the Scriptures, when in fact they constitute one reality. The bad thing about saying that the church is built upon the Word, you get the impression that it's built upon the Old and New Testaments as documents. And that's not true, because Christ is the content of the Old and New Testament, but he's the content in a different way. And now we get to the business of now having the Old Testament lessons along with the New Testament, which I always find very intriguing. I really enjoy that, because for last Sunday, it was Ruth staying with her, recognizing that the kingdom of God was present with her mother-in-law Naomi. And of these 10 lepers, it's the Thanksgiving pericope, and it's a marvelous pericope. And I only get it when I'm working with the students on that thing. Jesus says, go show yourself to the priests. By going to the priests and doing what Jesus said, they were failing to do what Jesus wanted. Because the purpose of the miracle is they would recognize by the miracle who Jesus was. And if you examined the words in that particular pericope, the Samaritan acknowledges that Jesus is God. He falls down and he worships and so forth. So there, right there, if you're preaching on that, if you're preaching on the lepers, you have an idea of what to say because you have that other material from the Old Testament. Both of those people do the unnatural thing. goes and does the unnatural thing of giving up her family, and he does not do the natural thing, because the true religion is no longer to be found with the priest, but to be found with Jesus. Jesus does not cure them in his presence. They are cured afterwards. And he says, this is where I have to go, and not to the other one. We'll say some more about that later. But I think what Trigg said, I think is very worthwhile. Failure to recognize this multifaceted meaning, understanding of the word was reason some years ago for some to challenge the phrase that all scriptures were Christological. They are Christological. In the case of Esther, which hasn't got the name of God, she is the Redeemer. She puts her life up for the benefit of other people. And every story in the Old Testament is capable of a Christological interpretation. And when it isn't, because I get as many periodicals as anybody else does, and the one from the evangelicals will come, and I just saw this as a book review. The big thing with us evangelicals is how to preach Old Testament as narrative. You can't preach the Old Testament as narrative. The Old and the New Testament is not equal. Christ is the hermeneutical principle for understanding the Old Testament. And they themselves, the Jews themselves, or the Israelites, knew that themselves. Because all of these people, beginning with Noah and Abraham and Moses and whoever, they were all figures through whom God was bringing salvation and redemption to Israel. That they knew. And in their redemptive or salvific function, they were Christological. And I think the person who really brings this up, and I touched upon that a little this morning, is the gospel. I'm beginning to realize the genius of the evangelist St. Luke. Because he may not only have a pagan story in back of how he's telling the account, he is also aware of the Old Testament. And while some of my colleagues claim he was a Gentile, he simply knows too much about the Old Testament in such an intimate way that he can weave it into his accounts. You can't, if you're not a native born American, you don't get the phraseology. You just don't get the senses. And he does. And you know, when I'm preparing a sermon, and we don't write sermons anymore, we edit sermons thanks to the computer. So by the time something is written, and Adrian Dorr has been helping me with a manuscript that's antique in age, and that is the more we work with a manuscript, the more we change it. You know, back in the days of dead orthodoxy, you wrote your sermon once, because you had to type it out. And then you had to deal with carbon paper. Some people don't even realize that. You don't even know what do you call a rotary phone is. That's not even in your memory anymore. So this is good and it's bad. It's good in the sense that you can put down your thoughts quicker. You could actually write a sermon in 1 hour, and you just write it as fast as you could. It's bad because you engage in too much self-incrimination. What are you smiling for, Westgate? You can go back to where you came from. You engage in too much self-critique, which is not a good thing. Things which are perfectly okay, you then look at. Because what I was going to preach on today was, and I thought I had destroyed it, but it came up on the manuscript. Let's see if you know this. This is what I was going to preach on. Did I get that right? What is that? Yeah. It's Latin. P-M-A-I. Fair, Mariae, Ad, Jesu. Translate.
We were married to Jesus.
And how do you know this phrase? It happens to be the motto of the Holy Father. The last Holy Father, this was his shield. PM, or maybe it's AIPM, maybe it's that way. I think it doesn't matter. And I think the current Holy Father has kept the same ones. Now, it's, I know a few Catholic priests, and they crack jokes. And I always feel at home with them because they're much better than evangelicals. See, they have an advantage that they're very close to us. We can say they really don't believe in original sin, but they certainly believe in a heck of a lot of actual sin. And they have the sacrament. They have the sacrament of penance, which is a great. We evangelicals have no sacrament of penance. You know, once saved, always saved. If you fall, that's it. That's why it's much better to be a Catholic or a Lutheran, because you can go back. And this creates a certain personality among Lutherans and Catholics, that Lutherans are much freer. You will not find evangelicals letting their hair down except in certain limited situations. And I mean, after a while, you would end up neurotic. And I just learned this, doing some reading on colonial America so I can understand Larry Rast. And among us pilgrims and Congregationalists, and that is, you don't think it's a very serious thing, but God is sovereign. In fact, he is so sovereign that he never tells you whether you're going to be saved or whether you're justified. You never really know. Sort of like this one, you never know. There's no certainty in the preached word. There's no certainty in the sacraments. None at all. Even though Calvin sometimes has a breakdown and tells you that there is, but they don't. So how can, was it time to go?
Well, we're going to have breakers.
Okay, good. And I'm up to about page 2. And so how do you know? You look for outward evidences. And you look, first of all, you look for outward evidences in your own life. But how do you know that the evidences of your life really suggest that you are a person acceptable to God? So how do you know? And you do it. Would anybody know how you do it? How do you know that maybe I'm not as musical as Peter Eckhart? By comparison. Or to use the term you used to do with your educational background, Mark, marking on a curve. Right? There's some people at the top and some people at the bottom and some people in between, right? So then what I do is I try to excel you in my works or in the possessions which I own. So I work as best as I can to make the best possible impression on you that I am sufficiently, have enough financial resources that I really look good. So you always are on, that you are always on display. Now, I tried to work this into a sermon, and you never know whether it works out because you're scribbling all this nonsense down. And you know that you could take, the Catholics kind of joke about this because they'll say, well, if you want to get on the good side of God, you have to get on the good side of their mother, of his mother. And then everybody laughs. But of course, that's exactly what they believe. If you go to my church in Fort Wayne, the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, there is a statue up there, or a stained glass window of Mary welcoming. And if you go into the Redeemer Church in Fort Wayne, there's a picture of Jesus, and I think there's even, well, the church here, by the way, has a picture of the Jesus dressed as the priest. He is the one who is welcoming you, and not Mary. But there's a certain truth to this. I was just wondering, should we say to us? Should we say ad nos per? It should be Mariam, by the way. Ad nos per Mariam, to us through. Just take the Pope's. Maybe we can suggest this to Mr. Harrison.